Today, I'm going to introduce you to Steve Turney, who's the executive director of the Mental Health Marketing Conference. It happens each year in Nashville. Steve and I have been chatting for a few years now, and he's such an awesome resource in how to talk about and market in a really tasteful way behavioral health services, mental health services, anything kind of in that space. And newly, he is the master of events. And I think it took 8 of the 9 years of them having this conference for him to realize, man, I really do things pretty well and make this event stand out. And so now he does it for other people in the health space. So if you are interested in how to make a powerful event, or if you're in the mental health marketing space, we've got something in this conversation for you. Here's my chat with Steve. I feel like there's always something to be learned from a conversation with somebody who's at least in a adjacent area. And you're like, wow, I never would have thought of that this way. Or they position back like a problem that they're having. And you're like, we may not work together, but that's the third time I'm hearing that problem, which means probably your people are looking for a solution. I feel like that's what led to you launching Turn.Productions, right? Like that's kind of the idea of what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, it's solving problems for people, and some of those people are ourselves. You know, I didn't start the mental health marketing conference, but that's been the large body of my work since 2019 when I got involved and, you know, rode that through COVID and adjusted and fell on my face a number of times in different ways and made mistakes. And those are wonderful learning opportunities. And then got good at running an event, you know, a single event. In 2023, after and during the conference that happened in the fall 23, I had a number of people come up to me, maybe 4 or 5 people, and say, hey, would you ever think about running an event for us, or would you run our conference? And I said, that's an interesting conversation to have, but I do not have a business plan ready for that. So, you know, we tried to put together a proposal, but it was the seed that then germinated over the next year so that at the end of the conference in 2024, the next year, you know, my team stood on stage and we said, we're launching Turn.Productions as an event planning and strategy firm. And then leads started coming in and we've had some really exciting deals come from it. But you even see this in mental health. A lot of people in the addiction treatment space and substance use disorder space that have maybe opened a treatment, like a good number of them are people who have come through that lived experience themselves. And they really have that deep, rich connection and sometimes painful connection to what that can mean because they experienced it themselves. And then to come out the other side of it and want to give back and contribute and solve problems that other people have, like they're oftentimes just taking the formula of how they did it themselves and then, you know, applying a business model to it. We did a lot of that. We figured out how to run an event and now we get to do it for other people.
It's funny because there's more than 2. But 2 routes, really, if you think about it, when it comes to offering typically a service. And you could go to school and learn how to do that service, maybe studying communications and try and have a focus on events or something like that. Or you can just start doing it and just, like you said, fall on your face a bunch of times, learn those things. And what's interesting is maybe you might have avoided some different pitfalls, but I think at the same time, you have no framework that has to be broken to be made better. You just kind of follow some assumptions and probably stumble into better ways of doing things in 2025 than what you would have been taught 5 years ago and you never questioned anymore. So I think it's a really interesting route to launch a service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. There is something to be said about like the echo chamber that can happen with expertise, and incentives get way wrapped up in it. But this is the way it's always been done mantra can be a wonderful, beautiful thing because it's been time tested and it's been vetted by all sorts of people, but often those people have a similar perspective on an issue. And it's the happy accident. I mean, in the event planning side, I call it the bluebird that just flies in the window at the last minute. And we get way ahead of planning and production logistical things in order to allow for the bluebird to fly in. And if you have too much rigor or too much maybe dogma around a certain way that things should be done, then nobody gets to ask the question, well, what is the sacred cow? Or what if we need or want to do something in a different way? And there again, in mental health, like clinicians and providers are wonderful. They can be tremendously valuable. Same could be said for healthcare generally. Doctors and nurses, wonderful resources, especially if you need it. But people with lived experience and people who are advocates for care or peer groups, things that don't maybe have a clinical modality to it, those can be just as impactful in someone's life, the way you can see somebody and show up for them and hear them and make space for them. So I definitely did not plan on becoming an event planner, and my wife even laughs that like, what, you're in event planning, but to your point, I never condone violence against somebody else. But if you're going to get into a fist fight, and it's either when you're 4 years old or 14 years old or 24 years old, make the mistakes early, because like a 4-year-old can only throw so hard of a punch. And a 24-year-old, like that could be a felony, So
Oh my gosh.
like make mistakes early when the stakes and the consequences are low. So we ate a lot of our own dog food, made a lot of our own messes, and figured out how to clean them up and avoid them. And that makes, I think, a good service provider, whether you get there by the book or you get there by life.
Were there any like sacred cows that were dispensed of, or bluebirds that flew in the window, that became a core aspect or a key differentiator of Turn.Productions?
Wow. That's such a great question. Okay, so found it. So in my life before event planning, I was largely on the sales and marketing side of the organizations that I was a part of. So I've been to at least hundreds of conferences and I've stood at dozens of booths. So I kind of watched it from that side of the table. And one thing I saw was that if you're an exhibitor at a conference, you are kind of over there. You're like in the other room. They don't say you're a second class citizen, but it's kind of like inferred by the room down the hall that you're at from the stuff that is really going on that would be considered conferencey things. And there are venue restrictions and considerations to think about for sure. You can't put everybody in the room. You can't have all the booths where the talks are going on. But on the other side of that, you bring in some celebrity speaker or some hyper expert with a bunch of letters after their name, and they are the VIPs and kind of the untouchables. And so what we've done is, I think, a really good job of ensuring that our events are infused with humanity the way humans actually operate. So we kind of reduce the hierarchy to more of a meritocracy and more of an even playing field. Once you're there in the event, it's a very inclusive event, and there aren't a lot of VIP experiences, and there aren't a lot of tiers or anything like that. So it's the Olive Garden thing. Once you're there, you're family. It's kind of like a family reunion. This event is not for everybody. We don't try to make it for everybody on the mental health marketing side. It's pretty niche. But once you're in, you're there. And then we find that making real connections comes from this triangle that I think gets overlooked. It's Aristotle's model of persuasion. So if you're on stage or if you're trying to persuade somebody to your argument, there's three things. And I think people who speak do a good job of one or two, but they typically miss the third one. So there's logos, which is like the logical argument you're making, the quantitative data, the research, like that's important to have. And then there's like ethos, which is like, what's that big idea that's bigger than yourself that is definitely more than, hey, buy my product, it'll make you money kind of thing. Like it needs to be inspiring and emotional. And then there's pathos, which is be a human, like actually be a human and be imperfect, even if you're on stage or with
Mm.
other people. So we do things that encourage people to remember their humanity. So one year we put a hot air balloon up into the air high enough that you kind of got a pit in your stomach when you were up there. I went up a number of times and it was like thrilling, literally thrilling. We
Interesting.
didn't send you a mile up in the air, but it was like right outside the venue. You could go up and ride and see the sunrise. And it was a logistical nightmare, which we pulled off, which was wonderful. But it took people into a sense of wonder and a sense of awe. And I saw bonds being made with other people who are experiencing the same thing. We've done puppy parks in the past, which it's amazing to watch, like a 50-year-old professional in a business suit turn into a child, and get fur all over them. We've done Japanese tea ceremonies, which are like very zen, very inner centered experiences that are also very bonding. So we try to do things like that to add that third kind of pathos, because I feel like that is actually the fundamental floor for connections getting made.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. I think of the events that I've gone to, certainly not in the hundreds like you have, I would say 90% of them probably would have seen any of those ideas as completely like taboo and would have been killed in the planning stage. How do you lead clients into that same mindset of that this will be a benefit? I mean, you just walked us through Aristotle's method, right? But is there more than that?
Yeah. I do talk about that a lot. There is an education process that has to happen, and there is another layer of decision making, or several more layers of decision making that need to happen. It's one thing for me to have skin in the game and take all the risk on putting a hot air balloon into space. It's another thing to convince somebody else to do it. And so there's an educational process, but to maybe our shared theme here, one of them in terms of lived experience is that I've been there and done it myself. And so I reaped the rewards of that. And I can show the video, the beautiful, video and drone footage that comes out of it, and talk about the lead up to that event and the surveys we sent out. Like, would you even go up in this thing? Because this is another like really important point during the education process of the clients we work with, is that if you think of like a bell curve, the event is kind of those 2 or 3 days or that one day. And I think it should be kind of a mountaintop moment or a summit experience. It should be something that inspires and delights and educates and entertains ideally. But then like the rest of the year, you've got opportunity on the long, long tail of either side of that to do the work of helping this event do work for you, which is,
Mhm.
what are we trying to do here? Make connections, build our brand, build awareness, drive demand for what we do, tell a story. The tail end of either side of an event is the gold mine, really. So what I say is, whether you're learning chess or whether you're going to pursue a degree or whether you want to maybe lose weight or put on muscle mass, whatever your goals are, try doing any of those things in 3 days. You simply can't do enough push-ups in 3 days to make anything
Sure.
except like excruciating pain compared to what you're doing the rest of the year. We talk a lot about kind of the 3 Ps of events. It's planning, promotion, and production. And promotion gets overlooked by a lot of planners because they look at an event and they see all the spreadsheets and all the details and logistics. And those are important things. But if you miss out on those moments of delight and then how to capitalize on those with marketing and promotion, you're kind of going to miss out on an opportunity. And then we've started to design events differently as well, where an iteration that we're launching this year in January is our Chief Marketing Officer Summit. So our mental health marketing conference is kind of generalist for most marketers. They'll get a lot of value out of it, but you can only dive so deep in 3 days. And so the CMO Summit is this apex moment. We're going to do some deep work on site, but then there's like a year-long peer advisory group and plan that these 50 attendees will go through together in these various little cohorts where they're checking in on each other's plans and progress and problems all throughout the year, which is really how change happens, is over time.
Have you seen anybody else in this space even considering developing community that lasts past the event? Because I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's exactly that. Like, you go to an event with the intention of creating connections, and then you're left to your own devices to do it however you can kind of figure it out. Like, you have your stack of business cards, or you scan some LinkedIn QR codes or whatever.
Yeah.
But this to me is such a unique differentiator for Turn. Are people surprised or even question whether this is worth doing? What does that look like?
Yeah, we are starting to develop our philosophy on that. And we're seeing it as two circles that represent two different hero journeys. And
Hmm.
they're fractal. So it's sort of like the way you make one decision is the way you make most decisions. And the way you make small decisions might have a fractal echo to the way you make big decisions. So we have grown the awareness that going to a conference in itself away from your home is sort of that hero's journey where you're leaving your home, you're finding the Yoda or the expert or the guru. They're giving you tools. And then in that moment of time, you're sort of exploring the caves that you fear that hold the treasure you seek. But it's kind of a small circle. And then you come home. And then we see the opportunity for a grand, like giant circle for the rest of the year if we're on sort of that cadence. It could be quarterly or whatever. But there's a broader circle where once you get home, you've just barely started the adventure and the journey. And so you need sort of those checkpoints and echoes along the way for the rest of the year. Otherwise, you're just kind of out there alone, and those notes get put in a file somewhere, or they just stay on your phone or your laptop and you don't activate them. So, it's sort of the opportunity to go farther together with maybe a small group of people who are rowing that same direction, and do it as a little bit of a tribe or a little bit of a journey that you take together with people. And I think that's not just an antidote to loneliness, but it's an opportunity to really go deep enough to understand somebody's different perspective. Like if you and I talked once a month, we would form a cadence of connection, and we'd get to really know each other. And I think that's the benefit. And just to wrap up that thought, it's also the benefit of any change. So like people struggling with addiction or certain things, one of the biggest indicators of success is how long your program sticks with you while you go through the change management necessary to make effective change in your life happen. And so that was like an awakening for the way that we can use events as this flashpoint, and then we've got to keep the fire kind of going all year.
You know who I think would be a really terrible person to work with you guys? Would be
Oh,
an event leader who just wants to tick the box in that they like hosted the event, like move on to the next thing. It'd just be such a long education journey. But for an event marketer listening to this who really believes in the power of this and has experienced even just the friendships they walk away from, that's the person. I guess if you're listening to this, this is not an ad for Turn.Productions, but but now it is. Now it basically is, because I love what you're saying. And in having been attending small and large events really for the first time since COVID in the last, I'd say 12 months, it's really resonating deeply. One of the things I do want to dive into is kind of away from events and into what you learn. In my mind, you're in two spheres. You have this mental health marketing depth of knowledge, and obviously the event production stuff, which we've dove into for the most part. I'd love to know just even high level what you're seeing as positive trends or successful efforts, or even just unique anecdotes that like caught your eye within the mental health marketing space in this past year.
There's a number of things there. One is the continued trajectory away from most stigma and toward awareness and into action and mental health. That's kind of one of the table stakes things we've seen and wanted to move the needle on for the past 10 years, is that important work. And then we're seeing more awareness about the bad actors that are doing nasty things with marketing. And one of those nasty things might be putting a lot of paid ads or a lot of marketing toward finding people who need care without regard for where those people end up or what the quality of care or outcomes would be on the back end of that experience, because it's easy to pour money into a lead funnel or a paid ad strategy. And there's some work that's been done and continues to be done, and that work has a long way to go, I believe. So it's definitely back burner, but I would love to get more involved in that work, because when this conference was founded in the initial few years, I wasn't a part of it. There was a lot of ignorance around marketing, and then there was some what you could call evil around mental health marketing. And those things, ignorance and evil, oftentimes has the same consequence. And so our attendees have gone from 200 per year to 300 to 400 to this year we expect 500. It's been 40% attendance growth year over year, which just speaks to the hunger for more information. And then I think another big trend is the shift toward the consumer, away from, simply driving leads through referrals, maybe doctor to doctor referrals. And those are important, but clinicians are starting to see those dry up in different
Hmm.
places. Psychology today is often brought up in conversations. Do I need to be there as a therapist? You probably do, or should think about it strongly. But people are also starting to recognize the ability that they have more power than they think to impact their lead funnel or their book of business with some real kind of blocking and tackling of marketing. It doesn't have to be necessarily super sophisticated as much as it needs to be clear and consistent. Those two things are hard to beat when you find the person you're trying to reach and you can identify their problems, and then you can make that easy to find. But what we see is the problem of therapists designing a website. You can just imagine they will start and they'll be like, okay, what degree should I list first? And it's like, no, no one cares. And wonderful. You have the degree. That is also table stakes, but you have to come at a website with one or two ways. It's either who is this for? And then what are your problems? Or what are the problems that I'm solving and who is it for? And then you kind of get the liberty to talk about yourself as the solution. But I think we've made a lot of progress in that in the last year. And it's not simply your website, it's your social media, it's your email marketing, it's all the places that you think you should be showing up. And then it comes and goes in waves, but there have been in the past few years, some ebbs and flows of private equity money coming into the space, and then
Sure.
technology companies working to solve for shortage of clinicians and access challenges through technology means. And oftentimes they come with a very savvy kind of Silicon Valley approach to consumer marketing, and there's lots of opinions about how and when to best use tech as it relates to behavioral health. But I would say that that savviness is welcome in terms of helping everybody level up with their marketing approach.
And one thing I want to just ask to clarify for myself along the way, the funnel that you were mainly seeing, lead funnel seeing kind of dry up, is the provider to mental health clinician road where it's kind of referral based from like your primary care doctor or something like that. That's where they're seeing kind of like the static, like or it's beginning to dry up a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And also like online directories that kind of promise to send you leads as people,
Sure.
Google certain things. And there's some great ones out there that are also competing or will be competing with the kind of longstanding Psychology Today. It's almost like a Yellow Pages, but it's a directory. And so those platforms are finding more competition with each other.
Yeah.
You know, unless you're on all of them, you're probably, maybe starting to miss out on some traffic. And then there is, yeah, the clinician to clinician referral. I don't think there's a great ideal system for it yet, but people are working on solutions to really solve for that. And there are some companies that are doing an amazing job of that. But the therapist's real problem for the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years has been that there are too few clinicians for too many problems. So
Yeah.
they haven't really needed in every case to do a lot of marketing, or they didn't feel like they needed to do a lot of marketing. But what's interesting from a macro level is that if you think of kind of the population as a pyramid with older people at the top and younger people at the bottom, our pyramid in the US is kind of an hourglass shape where there's kind of a bottleneck of Gen X people, which also happened to be the perfect age for a clinician, 40 to 50. And on either side of that, there were a lot of people who were older than that and a lot of people who were younger than that. Well, now we're seeing the younger cohorts wash into that perfect age to be a clinician. So that's creating more supply and will, I
Hmm.
think, continue to create more supply in addition to the rise of technology and AI in solving for mental health. And then there's one more big component, which is other services in mental health care that aren't simply talk therapy for an hour with a clinician. So, as we grew with awareness around mental health and mental health care, that was kind of the place that most people, I think, landed on in terms of their comfort level with mental health is okay, well, I'll go to a licensed professional counselor or a marriage and family therapist for 55 minutes every hour. And that's my entree into mental health. Well, that's awesome. And that for me in my own personal life worked wonders. It did amazing things for me. It's not for everybody necessarily, but we've added a whole bunch of layers and options around what mental health care can mean, including small peer advisory groups or AA and different things that maybe don't have, a licensed professional sitting one on one with somebody, but that doesn't mean it's not mental health care. So we kind
Sure.
of got dynamic about the breadth and depth of services that we can provide to meet the access challenges. And then there's more people to be able to become clinicians. And then there's the technology solutions. Like there's a lot of people who are just more comfortable with Chat GPT, and I'm not recommending that as a therapist option, but you can sure learn a lot of things from ChatGPT. So there's like a blurred line there about how we do that best.
And I think some of those like differentiators, even if your baseline service is a licensed therapist, 55-minute sessions, that's been my experience as well. And similarly, has worked amazing for me, just sussing through different things. But I think when it comes to the accessibility of telemedicine, that brings, as long as they're licensed, a clinician from nearly anywhere to meet with you where you're at. And so the differentiator of the local person kind of needs to go beyond the service, but to also add probably their perspective to it to draw somebody to them. And like you said, their activity on social media, kind of giving away the farm in a sense when it comes to just talking about the thing that obviously they're licensed across a wide range, but there's something that brought them in to do this, and begin to hang your hat on a few different differentiators, talk about them constantly. And the people who come in the door, what we've heard and seen is that even the trust built up through your marketing can lead to faster outcomes because the walls that have been put up are already lower upon meeting one versus where they might have been on meeting five. And I think what marketing can do for someone's mental health journey in building trust up front, was something I only learned about 6 months ago, and I thought was very fascinating. Are you seeing other differentiators with localized practices or even the larger telemedicine brands that seem to be working well to draw a certain audience?
That is so important. I think that's such a great point. And from a marketing standpoint, that is brand positioning. So there's different ways to think about brand, what that means. One way I define it that I like is a brand is a promise. And so if your logo looks like trash, maybe you're trying to communicate that you're a trash company or something, there's so many facets that go
Yeah.
into a logo, but your brand is not your logo. Your logo is one part of this promise that you make everywhere that somebody sees you to say, this is what to expect when you get here. And that is communicated in the way we talk, in the types of videos that we make. I mean, the beautiful work you all do,
Oh, thank you.
in terms of telling stories and things like that through visuals is all a portion of brand work. And so the point you made about speaking about the problems that you solve out in the market, there's probably no clinician out there that can solve everybody's problems or boil the ocean, and there's no need to. So why not find where your best and highest use is and communicate that into a market which is really fuzzy with experts that or pseudo experts, that oftentimes have some great things to say and oftentimes need a few more guardrails. And it would be amazing to have as many qualified clinicians and experts and advocates out there saying the things that can compete in a lot of noise and
Yeah.
find those people who you can best help. So, yeah, part of that is like marketing branding 101. I love that point, but it's also really mission critical, I think, to counter a whole sea of information and be the signal in the noise for somebody who can find you as a trusted resource. And that's aligned with the best work that you do, perhaps as a clinician. And that leads to kind of that affinity and clinical alliance, which is, again, one of those indicators of how long can this relationship last between patient and clinician is one of the best indicators for how much change can happen.
It's interesting too. I think, any business owner has a fear around being very sharp and specific in their positioning for
Yeah.
fear of losing the other opportunities, right? And tends to be based in finances. But when you think about an individual clinician, and obviously this is practice based, but how many patients or how many folks does one need to come in a month to actually have an established practice and business? And then you compare that number to your actual like local market size, you realize you're like, I don't need 1,000 people a month or 500 people a month or 100 people, or maybe you're getting close there. I have no idea. I'm talking out my butt. But the person who's thinking about listening to this and thinking about their own practice, you take that number and you compare it to the market size, it's guaranteed that there's more than that number that's going to align with your POV and your unique skill sets. And putting those things forward is actually tends to generate traffic in faster, and you're not competing against every other person with the same, to your point, the same degree. It ends up making the decision to join and receive care a lot faster.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's rough math, but let's say you have an 8-hour work day and you spend 2 of those hours doing paperwork or clinical notes. Maybe you see 6 people a day, and there is quite a robust debate online about how much should a therapist charge. And it gets into debate about ethics and things like that. But you can see a clinician or a therapist charge $100 an hour for those 6 people and you can see them charge $300 an hour for those same 6 people. It's a little too nuanced to get into like what's right or what's best for everyone. There's probably no universal panacea of like solution, but there is a big opportunity if you position yourself and your pricing into a niche that has a total available market or TAM, which is big enough to support your approach. Then why wouldn't you do that, given that your resources are not scalable? And it's why we see a lot of clinicians go into a side hustle or online courses or different things. They're trying to expand beyond those 6 to 8 hours that they can provide care for people and counseling, but they're one human. So they have that challenge. And then we see practices spin up where that clinician says, well, okay, now I'm the CEO and I'll hire 5 more. And, maybe I'll continue my book of business, but I'll get a rev share off of the work that they bring in. And so there's different ways to solve for scale, but it does come down to a therapist generally being a non-scalable resource that only has so much time and energy. And so how are you going to spend your time and what are you going to charge? And we've had to do that at Turn.Productions. I mean, we kind of rolled out minimally viable brand in October, generalist event planning production, we'll take all comers. And we are in the process of positioning our brand as healthcare focused. And one thing we've been saying lately is less sterile and more stellar when it comes to healthcare conferences. Now, the operating room, we want all the sterility world. But when it comes to events in healthcare, they're so stodgy and stiff and kind of, the same thing year in and year out. And that's an opportunity for us to lean into a problem that we see, which is it's missing that element of human fun, laughter, entertainment, those things that pull us out of our day-to-day kind of grind and have us kind of look up at the stars a little bit. So we're doing that ourselves. It's another great point you make. It's important to think about positioning because it's the exact opposite of our fear, which is we're going to pigeonhole ourselves too much. And you can do that if you're only selling to people named Jeff who live in Wisconsin. Like that's a short, small market, maybe. I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe not. But you can most often zoom out too far rather than zoom in.
Yeah. Well, I hope that encouraged somebody, whatever stage of their business, especially as a founder. I think that's where the fear comes in, is for the founders or, CEOs. I hope that encouraged somebody to make a push into really narrowing. Let's go on this, Steve. And I think you might have alluded to it a little bit already. What are you excited about that you've kind of been like chewing on, musing over right now?
Well, thanks for having me on. This is a delight to talk with you in a recorded session and our conversations offline too.
Yeah.
What's really exciting to me right now is this move toward AI, and not just AI, but as it relates to the work we're doing, there's this idea that if you think about it from a physics standpoint, when new technology comes out, it often makes like the previous tech outdated, so live streaming kind of did away with CDs. But then we see this cantilevered reawakening of an old technology, and that was the maybe concerts or records, vinyl. It's like, why is that all making a comeback? And why can Lady
Yeah.
Gaga like fill up the entire country of Brazil with a concert and Taylor Swift is going everywhere? So how that relates to my work is that I think that last mile of connection and humanity and interpersonal ability to trust what we're seeing is getting hard to do online, very hard to do online in some cases.
Yeah.
And for now and for the foreseeable future, what I don't see changing is the ability for you and me to get into a room and me to shake hands with you and not know whether that's reality. And so then I can, make a deep, strong connection. So there's that. And then also what I'm really excited about is, and I did allude to it with sort of the CMO summit that we're doing, smaller, more boutique, high experiential ways to get the right 50 people in a room rather than the right 500 people in a room. Both of those are beautiful challenges and great work that we'll keep doing. But those smaller, kind of more intimate, bespoke, high touch kind of events, I'm really excited about because of the hunger that's there in the market. and then what we can do to connect those people with companies and organizations and other people who are really looking to have deep, meaningful conversations with the attendees there. I'm excited about learning more about how to make that as successful as possible for people.
I love that. Awesome. Well, pleasure as always to chat, Steve. Thanks for coming on. We're looking forward to people hopefully reaching out, because I think you're a great fit for anybody looking to do something in the event space within healthcare.
Thank you, Dustin. I appreciate it. It's a real treat to be here. Thank you.